Hi guys, it's Shane back with Armchair F1, and this is a video I wanted to make because of the recent stuff. Basically, the thing that's brought this on is the fact that Oscar Piastri looks increasingly likely to become the first driver ever to win 3 consecutive junior categories in 3 different in 3 seasons as a rookie, and that's unbelievable. But it also looks like he is highly unlikely to find his way into Formula One next season, which is somewhat tragic. He's clearly got the talent, but it looks increasingly likely that that second Alfa Romeo seat is going to go to someone like Guan Yu Zhou, who has funding, or Giovinazzi, who has experience. And this has led to a lot of fans suggesting what I'm sure they consider to be very innovative and cool ways of ensuring that young drivers come up into Formula One, as though it's something they have a right to. I mean, they don't have a right to it. It is a profession. This is a ruthless industry. If a team does not consider them to be the best option, then they won't hire them. And that is ultimately the way it works when you hire your employees. So I wanted to go over a few of the most common suggestions that I see and explain why these wouldn't work. Now, the first option that I see loads of people suggest is extra teams. Just like have a couple of extra teams on the grid. So there are major issues with it. The first one is, if we look back at the last time we had multiple new teams enter the sport at the same time, it was in 2010 when we had HRT, what became Caterham, and Virgin, which became Manor, enter the sport. So they had 6 cars on the grid for these up-and-coming young talents, didn't they? No. Of those 6 seats, 3 of them in the 2 Lotus cars being driven by Heikki Kovalainen and Jarno Trulli, and one of the Virgins being driven by Timo Glock, they were veterans. And the other 3, the 2 HRT seats, were both pay drivers in Karun Chandhok and Bruno Senna, and the last Virgin seat went to Lucas di Grassi, who was another pay driver. These weren't the up-and-coming young talents. The really talented youngsters like Nico Hulkenberg, that he ended up at Williams, and Vitaly Petrov ended up at Renault. These were talented drivers who ended up elsewhere on the grid. So if a team wants that talent, they will take a punt on it. But if they don't, then they will just go for someone with backing. And a smaller team is much likely to go for experience plus backing, as we saw with Williams when they had Sirotkin and Kubica. Was it? No, Yes, it was Sirotkin and Stroll. And then they brought in Kubica, who had experience and funding behind him. Kubica should never have gotten a seat back in Formula One. And the fact that he's still doing race drives now for Alfa Romeo when Kimi was ill, and people are still asking for him to come back. No, Kubica is a pay driver now. He's a past it hero, sure, he's a hero, but he's a pay driver. He's one of those drivers that people rally against if it was a Lance Stroll or a Nikita Mazepin. But because he has a cult following, it's okay. This happens in F1. So new teams probably wouldn't fix the issue. The next option I see is people saying, oh, just allow big teams to run third cars. Wonderful. There is such a thing as a budget cap in Formula One. Teams cannot justify that. At that point, you have to increase the budget cap, and increasing the budget cap defeats the point of it, which is to make the smaller teams able to compete. Because a young driver doesn't really want to join Formula One. Like Mick Schumacher, as a reigning F2 World Champion, do you think he wanted to join Haas and drive around at the back of the grid for however many years before he gets a midfield drive, and then has to scrap desperately to get into a top drive? It's all well and good getting these drivers into Formula One. There are millions of young drivers that want to become a Formula One driver, and there are 20 drives and 4 that you could consider truly competitive. Not everyone is going to get that. They're just not. Look at Mercedes. There are 2 Mercedes seats. One of them goes to Hamilton right now because he's earned that right at this stage that he can have a seat, and you'd be insane to let him go. And the other one is Russell because, again, he's patiently waited it out. Do you think Russell wanted to spend 3 years driving at the back for Williams? No, of course he didn't, but he patiently waited it out. And drivers do occasionally have to wait. So the third car option is not going to help because it increases the budget cap, it increases the gap between the front of the grid and the midfield, and now instead of it being, the top 6 and then the best of the rest, it's now the top 9 and the best of the rest. If you have 3 Red Bulls, 3 McLarens, and 3 Mercedes on the grid, and then 3 Ferraris as well. That's 12 cars. That's the top 12 spots pretty much taken. Even if you say one of them can't score championship points and they have to be driven by a reserve driver, that's not helping these drivers get a foothold in F1. They'll get a season in F1, and if the team decides they're not worth going into one of the main permanent seats, what happens? You've got them into F1 for a season, and then they've been discarded. So, turbocharged Red Bull Driver Academy kind of job. And the final option that I wanted to go over, and I've seen this from several people suggesting different lengths, is introducing a mandatory cap on the length of a driver's career. Now, the popular one I've seen is 10 seasons. No. This is one of the more stupid suggestions I've ever seen regarding Formula One. So, How would you feel if you were at your job and you were very good at your job? Say you are a bartender or a barista, and after 10 years and you've done really well and you've like proven yourself repeatedly and you're comfortable in your job, your boss comes up to you and says, "I'm sorry, I know you're performing really well in your job, but the rules say I have to get rid of you for someone younger." You're going to be fuming. This is these guys' profession. You can't just kick them out because, you know, you can't establish a rule that is a hard cap on the length of a driver's career. And this would have massively compromised. If we'd had this rule, if this had always been a rule, the number of amazing seasons we'd have missed out on because of this rule, which people don't think about. So the incredible 2003 season with Schumacher, Raikkonen and Montoya doesn't happen because Michael Schumacher was forced to retire at the end of the 2000 season. The amazing 2012 title challenge from Fernando Alonso doesn't happen because the previous year was his last in F1 as his 10th season. We don't get to see this current duel between Max and Lewis because Hamilton was forced to retire at the end of 2016 alongside Nico Rosberg. Well, actually, Rosberg. We wouldn't have seen the Rosberg-Hamilton fight because he was forced to retire at the end of 2015. Verstappen, who looks like one of the most exciting drivers who would have a 20-year career in this sport, would be forced to retire at the age of 27 because you've decided that other young drivers need a chance. Like, some drivers do stay around a bit too long. I'd argue Kimi has possibly stayed around a bit too long, but he has every right to. If the team still want to employ him, then he has every right to accept that job in a job that he enjoys. Like, it's not on him to step aside for a younger driver just because other people feel like it. People have been slating Bottas, saying he's past it. Bottas is closer to his teammate this season than Perez is to Verstappen. So if anyone's past it, it's Checo, right? Checo is making the rest of those Red Bull drivers look very, very good right now, and Max look even better. Or there is just a bigger gap in quality, like, between those drivers than we think. Like, Max is probably very special, and Perez is merely very good. But the same thing applies at Mercedes, except it's the opposite because Bottas is a Saturday man and Perez is a Sunday man, but that's besides the point. Introducing a mandatory limit on a driver's career just to try and force in younger drivers. What happens if a bunch of drivers have to leave and there aren't enough high quality drivers to replace them? So you end up with a bunch of not particularly great drivers on the grid. You end up losing genuine stars that came up to F1 very young and they're no longer able to continue and build a massive long career for themselves. That's the thing. When it comes to the pinnacle, it is harder to get in and stay in the top because there are only those 20 drives. And people who compare it to, you know, IndyCar and the World Endurance Championship, they are fantastic sports in their own right. I do enjoy watching IndyCar and I do enjoy watching the World Endurance Championship and GT racing, but they aren't Formula One. Neither is Formula E, right? Formula One is the pinnacle, and drivers go to those sports when their opportunities dry up in Formula One, especially in Europe, right? European single-seater drivers don't go through their single-seater career thinking, oh, maybe I'll go to Formula E or maybe I'll go to IndyCar. They're aiming for Formula One, and when that doesn't happen, that's when they end up in one of those other two series. It is a second choice for them, and pretending otherwise is a joke. That's why these series seem so competitive in a way, and without being too disrespectful to the drivers in them. So drivers like Stoffel Van Dorn, Nick De Vries and Jake Dennis in Formula E, they aren't the elite drivers in the world. The elite drivers in the world are in Formula One. That's just a fact. Among the European circuit, if you don't end up in Formula One, then you look elsewhere. Like, Ilott didn't start looking at IndyCar drives alongside Formula One drives. He started looking at IndyCar and Formula E after it was clear that Formula One wasn't going to happen. That's the way it works. Promoting young drivers is obviously important, but at the same time, you have to handle it with restraint. Yuki Tsunoda was promoted far too soon. Like, he needed another season or two in Formula 2 to mature. Like, he was not ready for Formula 1 when they put him into Formula 1. And it could very well crush him. Hopefully he pushes through it and becomes a great talent. But it looks likely that the pressure is going to crush him. And it's not going to harden him into a diamond. He's still a very rough diamond. But it will just break him. At this rate, it looks like it's going to break him. And pushing those young drivers through too quickly, through a mandated rule, will not help that. I think Haas made a huge mistake by going for two inexperienced drivers. But what choice did they have? Because they needed to take on Nikita Mazepin's funding. They needed that money. And it made sense to take on Mick Schumacher. So, but then you see where Haas are now, where they've got two really young and inexperienced drivers and don't know which direction to go with their car, and their drivers are at war with one another. Like, this is the risk you take with bringing in these young, hot-headed talents. So trying to mandate young drivers going into Formula One isn't a good solution. And trying to do it through stupid ways, like the extra teams, probably won't work, because it's either a manufacturer team which are going to go for an experienced hand because they want results, or it's going to be a small team which are likely to go for a man with funding. That's the way this climate works. Then you have third cars. That's a terrible idea all round, because of the budget cap, because of the way that teams will abuse it, where, say, Red Bull had a third car and they put Liam Lawson in it, and after a season he hasn't impressed them enough to take over from Max or Checo, then where's Lawson now? Because he's just getting thrown out if you introduce rules where it has to be a rookie. So it's okay, you're not good enough, bye. And F1 becomes this conveyor belt of just churning, like putting in young drivers in the car and crushing their careers. And then as for the mandated career length, that is a ridiculous suggestion. That is such a terrible suggestion, and I cannot express enough how much I would disagree with that. So this has been my video on how to get new drivers into Formula One and the ways you shouldn't do it. I do think we need to look at trying to get young drivers into F1, but I don't think the ways that people have suggested, in particular these three, are the way to do it, and I have explained why. If you agree with me, please let me know, and if you don't agree with me, let me know why. I would like to learn why you think these ways are good and why you think this is the way forward for Formula One. Until next time, I have been Shane Knight. Thank you for watching.